Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss the concept of sovereignty. In my previous videos, I have discussed the concept of sovereignty that a state needs the four most important fundamentals for its existence, which are territory, population, government, and the fourth one is sovereignty. So, in political science, it revolves around the two poles, that is, the sovereignty of the state and the liberty of the individual. In order to understand sovereignty of the state, we must understand the liberty of the individual. So, these things are interrelated. Sovereignty means the supremacy of the will of state as expressed by its laws over all individuals and associations within its boundaries. It means the supremacy of the authority of the state within its territories and against all powers and authorities beyond its frontiers. It is a supreme law-making power of the state. So basically, there are two, you can say the important parameters to know about the sovereignty that uh, it is has to be look around the sovereignty of the state and liberty of the individual. So sovereignty is a single authority, which means that sovereignty is a supreme authority over a geographic or political territory, and it is unrestricted power that no other state or foreign power can intervene in a sovereign nation. Sovereignty implies that a nation state has unrestricted, absolute power to govern its people as it sees fit. And the third one is self determination. That the sovereignty also implies that nations have the right to self determination and are free from external influence or domination. So basically, a sovereign state is a state which is free from external influence or domination. It has the single, absolute, unrestricted authority. Definitions of sovereignty by famous writers. Thomas Hobbes, as in my previous videos, I have discussed the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes, and he said that sovereignty is the power of an undivided person or group to make decisions and enforce those decisions on behalf of the body politic. On the other hand, John Austin said that sovereignty is the highest and the only uncontrolled power that is legally supreme over all individuals or organizations within a political community. So basically, sovereignty is that a constitution comes under a sovereign state, which means that the constitution is supreme above all individuals or all political entities or all economic entities. So, a sovereign state is the ultimate, has the ultimate authority, which means that all individuals must obey their laws, particularly their constitutions, and the constitution and the sovereign state is legally supreme over all other individuals or organizations within a political community. Attributes of sovereignty: absoluteness or unlimitedness. So basically, sovereignty is absolute, it is unlimited, which means that it can be exercised over all the total area of the territory of a state, which means that if a country has a total square meter of around, you can say, 1,50,000 square meters of its territory, it doesn't mean that the state has only power to exercise its authority or control over its capital or some particular provinces or counties, which means that sovereignty or the sovereign state has the right to exercise its sovereignty or absolute power over its whole territory, and this absolute power or unlimitedness is indivisible, which means that the sovereign, the indivisibility attribute of sovereignty is that it cannot be dividable. It doesn't mean that, for example, United States has 50 states, and the president of USA said that every uh, you know state has its own sovereign power, right? So basically, sovereign power is dedicated or allocated to the central authority. It is undivisible. It is um, before or in the hands of the state, and which is universal. It doesn't mean that the sovereignty is seasonal or it's for some yearly purposes, which means that, for example, if a state tries to be a sovereign state for 10 years, and after that 10 years it decided not to be sovereign anymore, it doesn't mean that. A sovereign state has that meaning, which means that it will be or should be a sovereign state in its whole life, or regardless of any indivisibility. It is all comprehensive, or it has universality. It is permanent in its character. It is not temporary, and it has the right to enforce laws and authority over its individuals and political organizations or any other social organization within its society. So it is exclusive. It does not mean that every institution, sub institution of the state has a sovereign power. It doesn't mean that the state has the government power. So basically, there is a difference between the state and the government. Uh, the government is not the state, but state is the government, which means that the government is a group of people who are elected by the people, or sometimes they come into rule by just themselves. So basically, they are the group of people who are there to rule over their subject, over their public. So they are the people. Some of them can be in legislation, some of them can be in executive, some of them can be in judiciary. So this does not mean that government has the absolute, unlimited, indivisible, comprehensive, universal, permanent power. It means that the state upon which they are exercising their rights given by the constitution of that state are provided those rights by the constitution of that state. They are exercising those rights. So government does not has that kind of unlimited or absolute power, but the state or the territory, or uh, uh, you can say the area upon which they are exercising their control or power, this area or that area is sovereign, which should be absolute, unlimited, indivisible, all comprehensive or universal, permanent, exclusive, and inalienability. Internal and external aspects of sovereignty. So there are two, you can say, aspects of sovereignty: internal aspect or external as aspect. Internal sovereignty means the supreme and final power to command all persons within the territory of the state. Its will is absolute over all persons and associations. It issues orders to all men and to all associations within the area of the state, and receives order from none. It will subject to no legal limitation of any kind. So, in internal aspect of sovereignty, there is lawmaking authority, which is absolute over all persons and associations. There is judicial system. There is proper judicial system. Like for example, there is a judicial system in USA, and the most important is the judicial review, which means that the court analyzes and inspects if other organization or governmental institution is not interfering the duties and responsibilities of an other institution. So this is the judicial review. So in internal aspect of sovereignty, there is a supreme and final power command all persons within the territory of the state has to follow. And executive power are those powers who are exercised by the executive, which ensure the laws made by the legislature should be implemented or executed well into their country. So in external aspect of sovereignty, which means that other states recognizes a sovereign state. For example, um, there are many countries which are formed from war, or there are, for example, Balkan states which were formed in a Cold War. So Balkan states were formed or recognized sovereign states by other nations, which means that this recognition from other nations is called the external aspect of sovereignty, that other nations are recognizing you sovereign, and this aspect is the external aspect of sovereignty. So the ability to enter into international agreements and treaties and international law does not limit the supremacy or external sovereignty of the state, because they are self-imposed limitations. So what are treaties? Treaties are those agreements which are signed by the signatory states over something that they are agreed to. For example, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was a declaration in which there was all accepted human rights were written, and the signatory states had the responsibility to implement those fundamental human rights in their countries. So these treaties for example, there is other there can be economic treaties as well. For example, NAFTA or SAFTA or other economic uh, international laws or international agreements and treaties. So, this is the external aspect of sovereignty, that the state chooses to enter into an agreement, because one of the most important condition of an agreement is that you may have to let down some of your rights. For example, if there is a state which has the dictatorship governance model, which means that if that country will enter into uh, international agreement which states that international rights should be implemented all over the signatory states, and there could be violation of human rights in that dictatorship state. So which means that if the dictatorship state is entering into that law, it has to abide by those decisions and has to implement those points or regulations which were set into the agreement. Otherwise the state can have or could have or could face some sort of sanctions or penalties. So it is not the letting go of sovereignty, but it is sort of self-imposed limitations upon which state enters into it, and it is the state's choice to enter it. It's not the obligation for a state. And the third one is control over borders, is the third external aspect of sovereignty, which means that the sovereign state has its own right to protect its border from external threat or invasion, which means that the state doesn't have the right or power over other state. So the right to exercise its power of a sovereign state is that it can only um, exercise its power within its own territory. It cannot exercise its, military power upon other countries just to show your military might. So you have to control our borders and to protect our borders as well. So it is suggested by some political scientists that it is better to use word independence instead of external sovereignty. So we see independence, all these things are included in independence. Your state is recognized by other states. You have the ability to enter into international organizations or international agreements. You have the ability to protect and control your borders. So uh, external sovereignty is just another name of independence. Sovereignty, globalization, and international law. So, um, basically, there is sovereignty that you have to protect your borders. It's your own choice whether you are gonna enter into international agreement or organization or not. So, in this highly globalized world, states are getting into, signed up for economic treaties, military treaties, social treaties, educational treaties, and whatnot. So, you can say in this globalizing world, it both have positive and negative aspects or effects on sovereignty of nations, and is a complex reality with no easy answers. Other than positive aspect, nations have, who violate a widely recognized customary international law can face diplomatic sanctions. So, it does not mean that you are entering into a globalized or highly globalized or industrialized, world. You are gonna exploit the whole system. You still have to face diplomatic sanctions as well. So, what are the positive effects of globalization over sovereignty? So, it can lead to greater economic growth, greater cultural exchange between nations and treaties. There can be, greater educational exchange as well. So, there can be free trade agreements like NAFTA, SAFTA, and whatnot, which does not mean that it is a loss of sovereignty, but it is a self-imposed uh, situation or a condition or choice for a state to enter into such kind of agreements. Negative effects. Globalization can also lead to a loss of sovereignty, as international actors can undermine the authority of a nation state in a various ways, which means that it can apply sanctions. You can have to face international courts. So, in what conditions you can face sanctions? So, if you are violating, clearly violating the laws, the international laws, so it will be obvious that you will face sanctions. And sometimes states might, apply sanctions upon you just for uh, their own self-interest. For example, United States applied sanctions over Iran, its nuclear power project, because US did not wanted any other state, any other, third world country to be a nuclear power. So it applied for a whole of a decade sanctions upon Iran. So this is the thing. And for International Court of Justice, for example, if I still remember Kulbhushan Yadav was Indian agent who was found uh, in area of Balochistan in Pakistan, and he was an active agent of fraud. So he was doing, you know, uh, there was, formation of leak information and stuff like that. So he was caught by the intelligence agencies, and then the matter went over the International Court of Justice. So this can also be a negative impact of sovereignty, that the state or the signatory member states of that organization which can apply or impose sanctions over a country. So constitutional, moral and natural human aspects of sovereignty. What are the constitutional? Written and rigid constitution, obviously. Provision of fundamental rights in the constitution. That a constitution is a written or sometimes not written pact, um, upon which the institutes of the states should have to uh, do things. For example, the constitution should be rigid enough to not amend it as the hour of the need. For example, if a country is wanting to legalize, you know, use of marijuana, so they simply come and said that it is the hour of the need, or we can do that, we can do business from that. So they just come, amend the constitution and go. So constitution should not be like that. It should be rigid enough to follow a proper course of discussions, and then uh, go towards the amendment. There should be provision of fundamental rights. The structure of a state within a written and rigid constitution cannot change except by a long and difficult process of amendment, which is check on its sovereignty. And this amendment state I just discussed. And the constitutional law is superior to ordinary law. So there are two kind of laws: the law which is like ordinary law, and the constitutional law, which is the absolute or undivisible. It has to have followed. So there is provision of a constitution have limitations not on the state but on the government. The constitution does not limitate the state, but it limits the government. For example, the government does not have right to interforce into the private lives of the people, right? So this is the limitation provided by the constitution over the government but not over the state. Moral aspects. Legally, the state is competent to do everything, but in practice, it can do many things, right? Obviously, it has, supreme authority. It can do many things, but morally, when it will be looked into a moral concept, it cannot make laws and execute uh, them. Like, for example, a vast difference between what um, Dean Pound had admirably called laws in book and laws in action. So there can be a difference in laws in book and laws in actions as well, because laws in books can be very rigid enough, which do not fall fit into the books of moral principles. So the ruler may sometime deviate from its rigidness and come over the moral grounds. And a wise sovereign will not make laws which just flout moral sentiments and convictions, violate religious beliefs, or interfere with long established customs and traditions of people in their sense of justice and good. So natural aspect of sovereignty. Sovereignty has traditionally been seen as a natural aspect of political power, which means that it's natural, it is given by the nature, and the sovereign cannot do what is naturally impossible. So human, there are several things which a sovereign cannot do. Firstly, because he's a human being. Secondly, because he has to do with human beings as well. So Gilchrist call these limits the limits of human endurance, and Dizzy has called them as the internal limits. Sovereignty in practice. So We see a lot of countries who are sovereign, like Austria, Australia, UK, USA, India, Brazil, um, Japan, China, um, Pakistan, and whatnot. So, but every country has its own political system, has its own governance model. For example, USA has presidential system, India has a parliamentarian system, UK has parliamentary monarchy. So all are sovereign states, but it is choice of the country to opt which governance model suits best for their interests. That's for today. See you tomorrow.